Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars. SoundCartel. The Franchising Code of Conduct is being shaken up this year, with the government rolling out a tranche of new reforms. But it's taken numerous high-profile franchising scandals and 17 parliamentary inquiries. So, what does it all mean, and why does it matter? From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Did you know Australia has more franchising outlets per capita than any other country, and 3 times more than the United States? In fact, franchising represents about 10% of Australia's GDP, an incredibly important sector to the overall economy. And while the industry is bursting with outstanding franchise examples, in the last 10 years or so, there have been some glaring issues, along with franchisee concerns around a perceived power imbalance with franchisors. Bruce Billson is the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman, and as arbiter of much of the early rounds of disputes, he has a unique perspective on this latest round of changes, designed to restore confidence in the sector. Of the many reforms to the franchising code, Bruce talks to me about 4 of them. But first I asked, how did the industry get to this point?
Yeah, look, it's been interesting. Over many years, you've seen a continuation of increasing regulation and of, I suppose, prescribing the kind of good behaviour that is at the heart of good franchising. So it's not like nothing's happened for a while. There's been originally a voluntary opt-in code, and it then gets strengthened in terms of good faith obligations, penalties, these sorts of things. And now we've seen the latest iteration, which really comes about from interested stakeholders, the media and the parliamentary process probing really what's gone wrong.
Well, Bruce, in the limited time that we have, let's look at just 4 of the reforms. And the first are changes to dispute resolution. Tell us what's happened there.
What's happened is my agency, the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman, has played a role for some time facilitating mediation and dispute resolution. It may be providing advice to people to say, look, here's the way you might want to conduct yourself in this discussion to get a good outcome. We may advise on what's provided for in the code, the expectation that franchise systems will have dispute resolution mechanisms themselves. What happens when you've raised a concern or a grievance, you've even given notice that something's not right in your eyes? What happens next? So some of the changes that are in place are really trying to support that cost-effective, timely dispute resolution so that those commercial relationships can continue. But there's also some new tools that have been envisaged in the latest edition of the code. Group mediation, or in some cases, if the parties agree, we can oversee and activate an arbitration process and get back to business.
Well, exiting an agreement can also be highly contentious. So what reforms should both parties look out for here?
Looking forward, if a franchisor is going to terminate an agreement, they have to give notice. So for a franchisee, if they're wanting to terminate, they have to give 28 days notice. And if the franchisor refuses that, then what are the reasons for it? The flip side is if a franchisor is exercising an avenue to terminate an agreement without notice on particular grounds, those sorts of arrangements now need to be surfaced, and 7 days notice must be given. That's for agreements and renewals entered into from the 1st of July. And where there's some dispute over that termination, you can activate that dispute resolution process we spoke about earlier, and that puts a 28-day call on those arrangements. That stops the termination, but it still allows a franchisor to require the franchisee to stop doing their business.
Now, tell us, Bruce, about a third reform that focuses on the expenses franchisees are required to pay.
Yeah, there's a real issue around what are those costs that franchisees are expected to pay, whether it's leasing arrangements, whether it's legal expenses, marketing fund contributions, obviously royalties and those sorts of things. So it's important to surface that so you know what's going out of the business And again, we can make that decision about whether this is a business undertaking we want to get into. So that's part of it. And part of it is, what's a marketing fund? It's not just pure advertising. It might be other things. Is there a third party taking care of those things? Are they meeting reporting and auditing obligations? Those are the sorts of things that the code reforms seek to really highlight in keeping with this disclosure ethos.
And the final change that we're talking about is the restraint of trade clause. Tell us a bit about that one.
That provision about a restraint of trade triggered by a breach of the franchise agreement is something that people are quite familiar with. What these changes do say is, hang on, just don't do it for an incidental thing. Like, don't do it because I've put too many pickles on my meat patty. If you've had a misstep against, say, the operations guide, and it has to be more meaningful than that. It's got to be a serious breach of the franchise agreement, not just a minor one, to trigger that restraint of trade. If it's minor, technical or procedural, and that's reasonable. If it's just a little technicality and all of a sudden you're handcuffed from maybe doing something that you're really good at, but you've missed on an operational manual technicality, that shouldn't stop you going on to consider other entrepreneurial opportunities in areas where you've got talent and experience.
Now, of course, there are a number of other changes to the franchising code, like disclosure requirements, leasing of premises, and cooling off periods. But do you think that these new reforms are really going to shift the needle for the sector? Or do you think there's still room for a power imbalance?
Yeah, I think this is a really meaningful step forward. I mean, we are talking about humans at the end of the day. And, what we're trying to do is capture in the black letter law what we hope is in people's hearts. And what's in people's hearts in good franchising is that mutually respectful relationship, a symbiotic rapport that recognises each contributes to the success of the business and that each party to it can benefit from that success. And I suppose something for me is at the heart of successful franchising are profitable and successful franchisees, because that's where the rubber hits the road, and it really puts a lens on franchisee experience. It really ups the disclosure and the information that's available so that informed decision making is able to be supported by these changes. And frankly, many of the leading exemplar franchise systems already do a lot of these things anyway, because they know it's just good for their franchise business and the relationships that they seek to nurture. So I think it's definitely a step in the right direction. For the best message I can give anyone thinking about investing in a franchise system, do your homework. Do your homework. Franchise investments aren't set and forget. They're not an autopilot proposition. They require an application of commercial acumen, understanding the tools and the know-how and the capability that you're basically buying into, but there's a responsibility to take those tools, bring them to life, and build a great business. And that's what's great about good franchising. So talk to trusted and accredited advisors. Talk to other people who have lived the life within that franchise system. Make sure that the culture, the business model, the obligations, responsibilities and opportunities that are shared are understood and are fair and proportionate, and you know exactly what you're getting into. And if there is a dispute that arises, don't let it fester. And if you can't do that within your franchise system, come to me in my office. Come to the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman's office. Let's help sort it out quickly so that businesses can get back to business. And good franchising is what we all aspire to deliver, because done well, it's a great model of entrepreneurship.
That was Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman, Bruce Billson. To contact the Ombudsman's office, head to the show notes of this episode for phone and email information. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow @BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.